Thanks very much, Jerry.
Thank you, Ian, if you're still here, for the welcome to your country. I heard that headland story as two Aboriginal people standing on South Head, watching the ships come in, and one saying to the other, "There goes the neighbourhood." I hope I'll help you understand why that was deadly accurate. So, good day everyone. Before I begin, I'd just like to warn you of a shorthand I'm going to use, the phrase 1788, which is not particularly relevant to Western Australia, I know, but it stands for that moving frontier of contact which began when non-Aborigines began settling Australia in 1788, and that settlement moved across Australia for the next 140 odd years. So it's a shorthand for all the different time periods since 1788. I'm also glad to say that I'm glad to be in Western Australia, because I wanted for quite a while to pay tribute to the handful of Western Australian researchers who pioneered non-Aboriginal understanding of 1788 land management. You may know of Sylvia Hallam's wonderful 1975 book, Fire and Hearth, and that's at last been reprinted. Rupert Gerritson's 2008, Australia and the Origins of Agriculture, is far too little known. It's a book about Aboriginal agriculture. Roger Underwood and Dave Ward and Neil Burrows and others have done valuable and precise plant fire research. Like me, all those took from the epic achievement of the people of 1788 and the uncounted generations before, who alone of the peoples of the earth dedicated an entire continent to sustaining rather than consuming its resources. I argue that those people made Australia by using fire or no fire to distribute plants, and plant distribution to locate animals. Giving plants and animals ideal conditions made them abundant, carefully distributing their habitats made them convenient and predictable. This was possible because most Australian plants tolerate fire, and because in Australia, almost uniquely, the only large predators to disturb prey are people. I begin with eucalypts. In their responses to light and space and fire, eucalypts display their history. Their shape shows whether they grow in the forest or the open. Locally, their size sorts them by generation, and each generation's shape, size and distribution announces the vegetation history of its surrounds, whether this was open or dense forest, or first one and then the other. You can trace the changes in vegetation density via eucalypts. And those things tell you not only about the trees, but about the locality. They flagged that locality's 1788 and colonial past. On the screen is the swamp gum, photographed in Tasmania. On the mainland, we call swamp gum mountain ash. And most of us know mountain ash, I'm sure, as dense forest of tall, straight trees. Basically, a fire rages, the forest dies. In the rich ash, thousands of seedlings race up to get the light, and that tall, straight forest returns. But this mountain ash has spread because it's always stood in the open. How could it have done that? A bushfire would kill it. Mountain ash is the most flammable of all eucalypts. Bushfire would kill it and replace it with swathes of competing seedlings, whereas without fire, this is rainforest land, as perhaps you can see in the middle ground and background. Only centuries of controlled fire could burn back that rainforest without ever touching this fire-sensitive tree. This is Jarrah, of course. It's at just north of Pemberton, and it's also a tree, I'm sure you know, which in forest goes straight up, tall, straight trees. But here you can see a tree in the open, and that spread contrasts with how we familiarly know a forest carry. In older trees, this is a bit young, but in older trees, a spread like that might indicate Aboriginal fire, because some, shall I put it, unnatural process has allowed the tree to grow in the open. So that's one kind of indication that you can see just by driving or walking around about what Australia might have been like in 1788. Again, there are places where eucalypts are capturing 1788 grassland, and under their cover, rainforest encroaches. So you see regenerating eucalypts form a grassland in the form of tussock grass or whatever it may be, and underneath, taking advantage of that shelter, rainforest is spreading. There's almost certainly more rainforest in Australia now than there was in 1788. What it means is that without fire, those places grow rainforest. Only determined and repeated fire could have made them grass in 1788, and yet in many places the historical records of survey plans show quite clearly that they were grass. The fires that made them grass are no more, and so now the rainforest is coming back. Colonial words and paintings and survey plans depicting land tell the same story. Many of them show 1788 grassland, which is now eucalypt forest. Why only now? Why didn't it become forest then? Some think bushfire converted pre-1788 forest to grass, but after a bushfire, as I'm sure you all know, scrub comes back more, not less. And in any case, bushfire rarely clears the big eucalypts. They resprout and they soon recover their dominance. Only repeated fire, clearing seedling and sapling for centuries until the old trees die out, converts eucalypts to grass, and only people make fires like that. You can see so much of that forest regeneration all around Australia because people favoured grass in 1788, which means there's plenty of places for forest to come back. Grassland carried many useful plants and most animals with most meat. It was a fire break, it made seeing and travelling easier, and it confined forest, making forest resources more predictable. Almost always it took the best soil, and probably there was more grass then than there is now. People put grass on the best available soil to lure grazing animals with the best possible feed and to promote grassland plants, most of them, particularly the foods like yams and orchids and so on. That meant clearing all scrub and at least most trees off that good soil. A rare European who realised this was Thomas Allen, who signed himself late Gardener to His Majesty William IV at Kew. Not a bad title. At Port Lincoln, South Australia, in June 1839, he saw that Aborigines were burning the best land. They were burning it clear, not burning the worst land. He noted, quote, "The native fires that so destructively take place on the best land of the greatest vegetative qualities, and which forms the truest and most certain criterion of the goodness of the soil, as when land is seen quite bare from burning, is positive proof to the practical observer that the soil is of first-rate quality, but which to a superficial observer, ignorant of the circumstances and cause, would absolutely consider the best land to be a comparative desert and unfit for cultivation." So he was correcting that common pioneer misunderstanding that no trees meant poor soil and no trees meant poor soil and trees meant good soil, whereas in fact opposite. Report grass where trees can grow. At the Ludlow mouth in December 1836, H.W. Bunbury reported a belt of open country without large timber, running parallel with the coast and varying in width from 1/4 to 1 or 1.5 miles. And you might think that's the belt of coastal heath that we now have. But at the nearby Vass mouth 35 years earlier, Nicholas Baudin was more precise about this belt. He said, the coast was bordered by sand dunes. Their landward side is completely covered with scrub and stubby trees of various kinds. Next, one finds a plain, about a short 1/4 league in extent, about 1 kilometre, ending at the edge of an immense forest that offers a most pleasant view. Our gardener found the soil, although sandy, to be of very good quality and even suitable for cultivation, so clearly good for trees. The plain is scattered throughout with full-grown trees. Crossing it, we found several well-worn tracks which took us to some large circular places where fires had just been freshly made. There were so many traces of fire everywhere. So somebody could successfully burn the Jarrah carry. An open coastal belt like that also ran right round to Tasmania and along parts of the New South Wales coast. And surely things like that are only possible with controlled fire judiciously repeated. Bunbury probably saw the Tasmanian belt because he knew what made it. By the extensive bushfires every 2 or 3 years, he wrote, the country is kept comparatively free from underwood and other obstructions, having the character of an open forest through most parts of which one can ride freely. Otherwise, in all probability, it would soon become impenetrably thick. This has already been proved in the case of Van Diemen's Land, where, in consequence of the transportation of the natives to Great or Flinders Island and the consequent absence of extensive periodical fires, the bush has grown up thick to a most inconvenient degree. We might ourselves burn the bush, but we could never do it with the same judgment and good effect as the natives, who keep the fire within due bounds, only burning those parts they wish when the scrub becomes too thick or when they have any other object to gain by it. We can never do it with the same judgment and good effect as the natives. It never occurs to most of us to try. John MacArthur was perhaps the first to try it in New South Wales, and on the West Australian south coast, grazier Lou Scott recalled of the 1920s. Native grass in those days, you don't see it now because it's not burnt. You have to burn to get native grass. You'd light it up about 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 or 4 o'clock it would all go out, and the next day you'd light it up again. The bush was alive with possums and wallabies and kangaroo rats. The fire only went slowly. It was only a little fire. It never used to get up in the trees and burn the possums. The real oldies followed the burning patterns of the natives in keeping the place green, learnt to burn little patches that they wanted for their existence the same as the blackfellow. Of course, not winter and not spring, because you kill all the little birds and animals, and so summer burning. Try summer burning now. Scott shows how much non-Aborigines might learn and how much Aborigines can teach. And most of us now accept what Rhys Jones neatly called fire stick farming. I hope that's a familiar phrase. It means patch burning grass to bring on fresh growth, and that fresh green growth lures grazing animals. Hence the farming, the fire stick. A few early newcomers noted that. At Albany, George Vancouver observed in 1791, fire is frequently resorted to by rude nations either for the purpose of encouraging a sweeter growth of herbage in their hunting grounds, or as tools for taking the wild animals of which they were in pursuit. In northwest Tasmania, Henry Hellyer remarked in 1828, "It's possible that the natives, by burning only one set of plains, are enabled to keep the kangaroos more concentrated for their use, and I can in no way account for their burning only in this place unless it is to serve them as a hunting place." Near Torres Strait in 1849, as far from Albany and Tasmania as you can get in Australia, Aborigines themselves said, observing that the grass had been burnt on patches of the flats, the blacks said that the rain that was coming on would make the young grass spring up, and that would bring down the kangaroos, and the blacks would spear them from the scrub. You can see by that fire stick farming is a harvest method. It's a way of harvesting whatever it is you're farming. To use it, you must first of all put grass on the best soil, as Thomas Allen saw, because the best soil makes the best grass, and only the best grass lures grazing animals. In 1845, Ludwig Leichhardt called such husbandry a systematic management of country. It was possible because people allied with fire. About 70% of Australia's plant species tolerate or encourage fire. Trees and bushes reseed or resprout, while dominant fodder grasses are perennial. So unlike Europe's fodder annuals, they reshoot. In other words, they refuel. 1788's first fire task was to control fuel, by ceremony of course, and by constant, careful burning. This let people prevent the terrible killer fires which have immolated the fringes of every Australian capital except Darwin in recent decades. Fires which must have decimated people in 1788 had they occurred. You couldn't possibly outrun such fires, and yet clearly Aboriginal people survived to 1788. Regular fires prevented irregular fires. Instead of our slogan, prevent bushfires, the 1788 rule was, a fire a day keeps bushfires away. Taming fire was a great achievement, and clearly one beyond us today. It also unleashed rich possibilities, and I'll go through 8 steps, starting with controlling fuel and finishing with managing country. 1, the more fuel is reduced, the more easily is fire controlled, and so the more useful you can make it. 2, even hot fires are going to leave unburnt patches, but as a general rule, the cooler the fire, the bigger the patches. 3, those patches benefit animals by joining feed to shelter country. That is, burnt is feed, unburnt is shelter country. 4, those patches can be extended over whole regions, whole countries, to form mosaics which can be adjusted in size by varying fire intensity. 5, intensity is regulated by fire frequency and fire timing. 6, frequency and timing are local. They depend on the local flora and local moderators like rain and wind and temperature and aspect. 7, the better people understand these local variables, the more they can burn or not burn with purpose. They can move from just limiting fuel to shaping the country to suit. And 8, this lets them selectively locate fire-tolerant and fire-sensitive plants, situate mosaics and resources conveniently and predictably, and arrange them so that one supplies what another does not. Now, of course, you can't burn rainforest in the same way as spinifex, and in the north you can rarely burn during the wet, whereas in the south there are opportunities year-round. So clearly, how you went about these things varied enormously. That's why the local knowledge is so important. But everywhere, fire's basic purpose was the same. Firstly, to limit fuel, then to ensure diversity and abundance, and then to regulate plant and animal populations, either up or down. The plant patterns that people made with fire were the same too. Grass on good soil, forest split up by grass, tree and scrub clumps and grassland, undergrowth uncommon. And the benefits were the same. Plants and animals were located predictably and conveniently. Now, that obviously required many fire types. Fire stick farming, of course, back burning around clumps or lone trees to protect them, sheet burning occasionally to clean up country, start again, making grass to keep animals off. That's a striking example. But yams, for example, grow amid the same rich grass which best lures grazing animals, which love them, and yet they flourished in millions in 1788. Murnong in the east, Warren in the west. So I assume that there were ways to maintain that grass but not burn it in ways which destroyed the yam crop. Again, along forest edges, people might let grass dry, then in the right wind fire it hot to drive prey to waiting hunters. This is Joseph Lycett, Aborigines using fire to hunt kangaroos. That's also the front cover of my book. As you can see, you've got dense forest, or quite dense forest, rising from the low ground between grassy hills. In itself a peculiar vegetation distribution, especially when it's not repeated everywhere. There's a very sharp edge between the trees and the grass, I'd say an unnaturally sharp edge, and there are fires on the edge of the forest driving the kangaroos up to the waiting spears. In other words, those people are not chancing on game, they're predicting when and where it will come. They know the kangaroos are going to come to them. They're also protecting the forest. They're firing its lee edge so that the wind takes the flames into the grass. If the wind lay the other way, they could fire the other edge. So skillful burning is keeping the forest dense, the grass clear, and the game convenient. Now that sort of forest, a dense forest, was a thing that newcomers cursed. In fact, quite often their descriptions of Australia said it was dominated by country that you couldn't battle through. Not nearly as much as now, though. But some plants and animals prefer it, and so in law you must provide it. The value of dense eucalypt forest was strikingly demonstrated in January 1798, when the first fleet emancipist and initiated man, John Wilson, led an expedition from Sydney southwest into tangles of scrub and fallen timber. In one memorable week, that party noted the first koala, the first lyrebird, the first gangang cockatoo, and the first mainland wombat recorded by a European. That's not a bad tally for 1 week. The point is that until then, no one in the settlement is thirsty to discover or to profit if you're a convict selling knowledge like that. No one had reported these creatures. Their country was bad, formidable, seeming untouched, a place to keep out of. Wilson knew them because Aborigines valued them and made or left habitats for their benefit. Where a purpose is apparent, I call plant communities deliberately associated, like forest and grass, to plant communities broadly speaking. I call this association templates. No matter which plant communities dominated locally, similar templates for similar purposes recurred across Australia. From spinifex to rainforest, people associated food plants and shelter plants. By selecting optimum conditions on templates and not nearby, they made target plants and animals on them abundant, convenient and predictable. They then activated the templates in planned rotation according to season and circumstance. So they knew where their resources were and they knew when to harvest them. They could choose, in other words. They depended not on chance, as we commonly assume about hunter-gatherers, but on policy. Lycett's painting depicts a template here, and here are others which I've chosen from opposite edges of the continent. Does anyone know where that is? Sydney Harbour. Good man, Swan River. This is Frederick Garling, a view from Mount Eliza, Western Australia, done on the 11th of March 1827. In other words, before European settlement, Garling was there. He's not far from the State War Memorial, just along in Kings Park. And he's looking at Mill Point and up the mouth of the canyon. But notice the difference in the front. This open foreground is now thick scrub. In fact, it's so thick that I couldn't take a comparative photo, which is commonly my experience, I must say. And also notice the darker colour. I couldn't find soil that colour in Kings Park now, so it's possible that that's the result of fire ash. But nonetheless, this is clearly a landscape kept open by fire, and you can see the Zanthlarrhea, which are fire-dependent plants. And then look at Mill Point. Look at these alternating belts of grass and trees. Tree, grass, tree, grass, tree, grass, tree, grass, all the way along. Surely an unnatural pattern. And yet you can see that those alternating belts across Australia. This is Robert Dale, a panoramic view of Kings Sound. It's the north end of Dale's wonderfully detailed panorama. It's nearly 3 metres long. And an early settler, G.F. Moore, called it a very good representation of the Sound and harbour. In other words, this is an accurate depiction. The view is roughly north from Mt Clarence to Oyster Harbour and the Calgon River, then called the Kings River. At centre you can see the government farm. You can see the government farm at Strawberry Hill, but in 1832 it was only 4 to 5 years old and it had cleared less than 6 acres in that time. This is a classic pattern for grazing animals. Grass here, belts and clumps of trees, alternating clumps of trees. Trees here and small clumps there. And the rest of Dale's pattern duplicates that kind of association, grass, trees and belts with water. And they extended beyond. Dale wrote, towards the interior, small lakes, thick woods and open patches reach to the utmost bound of sight. You can see the patterns in other artists too, William Westall's King George's Sound, Jacket's, the view of the King George's Port. So there's no doubt that this is accurate and those others duplicate the same pattern. Dale also shows Aboriginal fires, small, and actually this, you can see the smoke there, but there's a small fire in there too. There's another one up there. These are small, controlled fires, and then these grass trees require regular fire to flower, and yet they have flowered. And today you can get burn ring research by people like Dave Ward on grass tree trunks, and they show that there were many more fires before 1788 than after. So this is a regularly burnt landscape, which the grass trees tell us. Dale also described a large, quote, a large plain interspersed with small lakes and wooded with clumps of Melaleuca and Banksia. And that looks like this country here. This is lake settings. You see 3 or 4 small lakes there and those clumps of trees sitting in grassland. Here's that same part today. This is a view of Albany north from Mt Clarence. And as you can see, dense trees here. I should say lake settings. The remnants of the lakes are here and here, possibly there. The obvious question to ask about that is if the trees are like that now or then, and they grow like that now, why have they changed? What's caused the change? This is Eugen von Guerard, the crater of Mount Eccles in southwestern Victoria in 1858. You can actually stand where von Guerard sat and match the scene's features with today. Have a look at this keyhole in the next slide, the keyhole, this rock face here, another rock face over here, this plateau here. There's the keyhole, there's the rock face, there's the plateau, it's now a car park, there's the other rock face. Clearly we're in the same part, and actually I think I took that photo probably about 5 or 10 metres from where von Guerard sat. I think I identified the rock, but again, the scrub was too thick to take a photo in exactly the right place. These are the tallest trees here. These are lower down, as you can see. When we go back, they're the tallest trees again. These trees probably started growing after Aboriginal people were stopped from burning the country. But the striking thing, as I'm sure you've noticed, is the difference in the vegetation. Thick scrub now, even though the soil, we're inside a volcanic crater, even though the soil is the same, thick scrub now, and these alternating patches of trees, grass, grass, such as Robert Dale depicted and so did Frederick Garling in Perth. And what's going on is that you could light a patch of grass here, let's say, or here, or in here. Fortnight later, especially if it rained, that would bring on green growth. That would lure kangaroos, and people coming out of the scrub could then harvest them. Kangaroos caught here tried to move uphill, which they probably would. They'd strike more people, or the rock face. If they went down, they'd be forced into the water, and of course they had no hope then. This is James J. Cobham, a survey plan near Cowie Point in Cape York, taken in 1891. I've touched it up a bit. I've put green dots where Cobham just drew pencil lines, and to mark where he was distinguishing the boundaries between two types of vegetation. First of all, rainforest, or what he called vine scrub, and secondly, well-grassed and timbered eucalypt forest. Okay, and you can see very distinct boundaries between them. So green is rainforest, white is eucalypt forest. The rainforest has a striking distribution. It moves up hills. It's not as though it's confined only to the low country. That's true. But down here, it's not on the lower ground, whereas it is on the headwaters. And since rainforest prefers the damper and more favourable soils, you'd expect, if there was going to be any breakup of the rainforest, that it would be down here, and this would be eucalypt scrub up here, especially since it's ringed with eucalypt scrub. And then look at this swamp. Two sides of it are rainforest, two sides of it are eucalypt grassland, and yet clearly they're on the same level and pretty well on the same soil. It's hard to think that that could possibly be a natural distribution. And in fact, we know it's not, because now all that is rainforest. Go to Google Earth and look at Cowie Point or anywhere along there, because this is only one of many survey plans depicting the same sort of patterns, and you'll see dense rainforest. Yet the early Europeans thought that was natural, thought it would stay like that, assumed it would be good land for tobacco, which is why Colin was surveying it. Two factors tended to make templates, one of them ecological, the other religious. Ecologically, laying out country variably to suit and balance all other species meant undeviating commitment to very intricate land management. Individual inclination and enterprise must be curbed, and ecological rules and knowledge must reach beyond living generations. The law, which I interpret as a religious philosophy rooted in ecology, compelled this. Across Australia, it taught that every living thing has at least one totem derived from a creator ancestor, otherwise it can't exist. Totem's a very bad word, but it's not a helpful word, but it's the best we've got in English. So everything has at least one totem. Even life that Europeans introduced, rabbits, camels, houseflies, coals like I've got now, they have a totem, and every totem has people who belong to it and at the risk of their souls must care for it. So emu people must care for emus and emu habitat, and emus and emu habitat must care for them. Same with black cockies and so on. Rules and myths and ceremonies about the sanctity of totems, including fire, warned and instructed until the consequences of disobeying were too terrible to contemplate. Totems thus protected diversity and enforced conformity via religious sanction, powerful in any society, of course. Evidence for an intricate fusion of law and ecology exists in enough dispersed places around Australia to say that the whole continent was a single estate. People went further. They made land beautiful. After bush, a word probably brought by the First Fleet from South Africa, after bush, the most common word that newcomers used to describe the landscape was park. Park. It's a striking word. Europe's parks were made. They deliberately associated water, grass and trees in picturesque array. Few of them were public in 1788, most were the preserve and mark of gentry. They signified wealth and leisure. Yet newcomers frequently compared Australia with those very places. In Port Jackson, Arthur Bowes Smythe rejoiced at the beautiful and novel appearance of the different coves and islands as we sailed up. The finest terraces, lawns and grottos with distinct plantations of the tallest and most stately trees I ever saw in any nobleman's grounds in England cannot excel in beauty those which nature now presented to our view. In November 1826, Robert Dawson thought the country inland from Port Stephens truly beautiful. It was thinly studded with single trees. You may have seen on television the bushfires out behind Port Stephens last Christmas. Very thick scrub, you couldn't have run a rat through it. And here it is talking of thinly studded with single trees as if planted for ornament. It's impossible, therefore, to pass through such a country without being perpetually reminded of a gentleman's park and grounds. Almost every variety of scenery presented itself. The first idea is that of an inhabited and improved country combined with the pleasurable associations of a civilised society. In Tasmania, John Hudspeth praised a beautiful and rich valley more like a gentleman's park in England, laid out with taste, than land in its natural state. W.H. Lee thought the country south of Adelaide a wild but beautiful park, which reminded one of the domain of an English noble. And around Bunbury, John Barrow saw plains well wooded with large timber trees, and the whole country wears the appearance of an English park. There's so many remarks about parks that J.B. Wilson got sick of them. Somewhere around Lake Muir in December 1829, he exclaimed, "So much has been said of the scenery in New South Wales resembling noble English domains that the comparison is rather trite." And then he went to Lake Muir. "Imagine a rich valley bounded on the south and north by a succession of undulating and moderately elevated hills, thinly but sufficiently ornamented with trees of gigantic form, and you may have some conception of the beauty of the spot." Now he's describing a park. How did parks come about? No one asked. Most newcomers thought the land was natural. They assumed that primitive hunter-gatherers lacked the skill and inclination to make parks. And yet, a clue was there in that observation that fire made fresh grass to lure kangaroos. If you've been on a golf green or golf course, you can see that lure working today, where kangaroos will go onto the greens which have been mown and got nice fresh grass, risking flying golf balls and angry greenkeepers, even though there's safe, tall grass only metres away. No, they go for the greens. So let's explore that with grey or forester kangaroos such as Lycett depicted. To attract them with fire, you must ensure that they go where you've burnt, obviously. So you must make sure the grass you burn is the sweetest and most nutritious available. Take care not to burn other grass too close, and provide shelter nearby so that kangaroos won't feel vulnerable. To ensure that the grass you burn is the sweetest and most nutritious available, obviously you've got to put it on the best soil. But trees grow on such soil, so you must burn to keep it permanently clear of trees, or at least most trees. Yet, kangaroos shelter among trees, so you must provide them neither too open, so the kangaroos feel exposed, nor too dense, so they fear being slowed down. So beside grass, you must have open forest, and perhaps beyond it, dense forest to shepherd the roos back towards the grass. In other words, you must make not only the grass, but the land around, using at least 3 distinct fire regimes and probably more. We quite often now think of kangaroo sheltering in scrub, don't we? But scrub was most uncommon in Aboriginal Australia because it's the deadly fire layer. It's the layer that lifts flames from grass to canopy. And so Aborigines have very greatly restricted scrub. Not entirely, of course, because it's a habitat, but there was much less scrub than now, and kangaroos therefore were much less often sheltering in scrub. But there's no point doing this kind of thing just in one place, because obviously after you hunt kangaroos, they move. You've got to lure them to the next place you've prepared, then the next, and so on. In short, you must pattern the whole country into places which will and won't shepherd grey kangaroos if you want to farm. Now think of all the other plants, animals, birds, reptiles and insects which flourished when Europeans arrived. All of them had their place, all had food and shelter which suited them. Many are now gone or going. For such diversity, a great variety of templates must be set up. I'm using examples of grazing animals, but all animals have provision for it. Burn eucalyptus so that you get young leaves, so that the koalas are provided for. Leave long grass for snakes and so on. Spinifex and mulga, rainforest and blady grass, eucalypts with tussock grass and bulbs and orchids and tubers, reeds and other water plants, all of those must be laid out. Given how long some trees especially live, that might take centuries to set up and refine. Templates for the same purpose could be close, but when activated, they had to be far enough apart not to disrupt each other, because obviously that would make the target animals unpredictable. You wouldn't know which patch they were going to, and therefore the whole system would be pointless. Activating a template thus meant negotiating with neighbours and totem elders. The law prescribed a lot of that, but still negotiation between neighbours must have been constant. The idea of isolated Aboriginal groups is simply a myth. The template system could hardly have had land boundaries if people are negotiating like that. There couldn't be a place where it was practiced and next to the place where it wasn't. You couldn't have a place where neighbours negotiated continuously next to a place where they were behaving randomly. In that sense too, Australia was inexorably a singular state. Now that system was much more than merely sustainable. Sustainable is the European word, isn't it? It always reminds me of somebody in deep water just keeping it just sustaining, you know. Any wave comes along and they'll drown. Possibly even in hard times, 1788 was so abundant that people may normally have harvested only resources made surplus by expanding off their template, off their totem place, off their conservation reserve, if you like. Such abundance was possible because people had plenty of land, so they could let plants and animals regenerate undisturbed. Mobility was thus a great advantage, whereas farming licensed population growth, mobility curbed. Whereas farming drove people out of marginal land, mobility let them prosper there. People did not have to stay by their crops, and no livestock, no beast of burden anchored them. Phyllis Carberry thought mobility, abundance and predictability let Kimberley women work less hard than farmers' wives, yet get food more certainly. The Aboriginal woman, she wrote, has greater freedom of movement and more variety. The agriculturalists may be left destitute and almost starving if the crops fail or are destroyed, but I never saw an Aboriginal woman come in empty-handed, although in 1935 there was a drought in the Kimberley. Geoffrey Blaney pointed out that people work many fewer hours a day to secure food and shelter than farmers anywhere. Of course, there were hungry times, or people might not manage their resources so carefully, but it was not the norm. People were not hinging on uncertainty or toil. The image of hunter-gatherers as improvident wanderers hoping to come across food is wrong. On the contrary, they could afford to host hundreds of guests, sometimes for months. This required setting aside big stretches of country to build up food, and yet such occasions were common. Abundant resources are also attested by how much spare time people had. Europeans complained that Aborigines sat around for hours talking, dancing or singing, even in broad daylight, which is especially terrible. And even today, many newcomers think that the most distinctive features of Aboriginal society relate to art or corroboree, in other words, to what Europeans think of as leisure. In fact, much of this is work. It's planning or performing to keep country and future alive. But the point is that only a well-ordered society could afford all that time away from the food quest. Really, the best parallel to 1788 is Europe's gentry, so it's not surprising that newcomers thought the land so often like a park. The parks have gone. Stopping fire let trees grow. Near Harndorf in the Adelaide Hills in midsummer 1839, Dirk Hahn saw people burning in Yonkaparinga Valley, midsummer. They form a circle about 20 English miles in diameter, light fires around this area, and then direct the fire closer and closer in towards the centre of this circle. The long, dry grass, bushes and young trees burn fiercely. All the animals living in this area flee towards the centre, where the savages then capture them. The fire burned for some days. So you have that kind of hunting fire, but in the same valley, Hahn saw the results of landscape management fires. Quote, beautifully formed trees which nature had planted there as if with the hands of a gardener. Every tree stood about 40 feet apart from the others. Some were perhaps an acre apart, so that the land could be cultivated without uprooting a single tree. I found grass a metre high. It looked like our European cornfields. Here's the same valley 30 years later. This is William Randolph Thomas, an Aboriginal family group on the Onkaparinga River near Harndorf in 1870. You can see the scattered big trees that Hahn admired, like the Mountain Ash and their carry, their spread confirming that they grew in the open. But there are no cornfields now, there's only scrub. This ruin is what many think southern Australia was like when Europeans arrived. But they think that because closer settlement, when most of the settlers came, began well after 1788 fire was stopped and forests began regenerating. You only need to stop Aboriginal people burning for 3, certainly 15, and in this case 40 years, and the country is transformed. To conclude, to wrest resources, the template system needed big areas free of people, while allying with fire required a mobile population with few fixed assets. A scant and scattered population made 1788 Australia vulnerable to invasion, but this should not mask how impressive the Aboriginal achievement was. To balance land and people so richly for so long across so great an area ranks among humanity's great achievements. No other world civilization managed it. Almost all turned from hunter-gathering to agriculture, and thence in time to a bad end or an uncertain future, such as ours. Aborigines never joined the agrarian world's race to a complex technology. There are instances of farming in 1788, there are many of them, but people were never likely to convert to it. Fire gave too many advantages. It let people fuse the ecology and religion of an entire continent into the biggest estate on earth, and instead of dividing Aborigines into gentry and peasantry, it made them a free people. Thank you.
It kind of shatters everything we were ever told, basically, doesn't it? It's utterly amazing. Effectively, the indigenous people were farmers. The kangaroos were their cattle, to all intents and purposes. Did they actually grow things actively, Bill? What did they grow? What sort of things did they grow?
Yes, they grew many things. There are early accounts of orchards of coconuts and northern fruits, bush plums, bush apples, pitchery as a crop, yams. There are accounts of the country between Melbourne and Mount Gambier as yellow with the tops of murnau yam. So clearly not only were they growing that crop, which requires cultivation, requires the soil to be tilled, otherwise it doesn't grow properly, but they're also keeping kangaroos off it without fences. And then there are people like Thomas Mitchell. He's on the Narran River, and he comes on a crop of millet, native millet. And he says, we rode 9 miles through this grass only, stretching back beyond the reach of sight.
Broadacre millet farming, basically. Any questions for Bill? We're way over time, but it's certainly worth it.
I was just wondering, Bill, what your thoughts were and essentially how that applies to the Southwest now, which is really highly fragmented, with diversity in very small pockets. Just wondering about the thoughts on that, and also the challenges for managing fire stick farming in the Garling forest, which comes up against pretty hefty logistical issues.
I think one of the key things I said is that you must know your local area. You must know how plants and fire interact, for example. But what the people of 1788 have done is show us what is possible. That's a great gift. That's an absolutely great gift. How you translate it, as I say, depends on local knowledge. And there are some areas, especially where people have put houses in bush, where we probably won't be able to do it. We just wait 20 or 30 years until the houses burn down. But there are other areas, and the areas you're talking about, larger forest areas, where it would be possible to create mosaic management and provide for a great diversity of creatures. The more edges you have, for example, between grass and trees, grass and water, trees and water and so on, the more diversity you can have in your environment. And I think the best way to make a good start on that is to talk to Aboriginal people. People in the southwest have told me, including in public, that the Aboriginal people of the southwest don't know much. Perhaps they don't know as much as their elders in 1788, but they do know a lot, believe me. Don't you believe for a minute that they don't know much. And more to the point, they know more than almost all the rest of us. And they are going to stay on their country because it is their country and cultivate lifetimes of accumulated knowledge. So if you've got a particular problem, I'd find out who the traditional custodian is and talk to them.
Yeah, thank you. In your book, you've got a sentence that reads, "By so thoroughly implanting means and incentives to shackle body and soul to the survival of all things in heaven and earth, it made environmental management obligatory."
Yeah.
How can we make environmental management obligatory now?
I don't know how long it took Aboriginal people to so develop a religious philosophy that they had no choice but to manage land. The point is that it was so powerful an incentive, as religion always is, that it worked. If you're asking me how we can replace Christianity with a more ecologically based, I think that's a big ask. But even in, the Bible's a wonderful book because you can pick anything from it, improve anything. Even Hitler used it in the early days. And so you can use it to talk about all God's creatures, they all deserve to be alive. And if you accept that part of the Bible, then the obvious question is, well, how are you going to do it? Australia is a world leader in species extinction. How do you stop that happening? And that leads you on the same track as the ancient ancestors of the Aboriginal people were led on. How do we look after everything that's here?
I guess part of the problem is that we have been working with myths up to relatively recently, up till such time as this type of research of yours has come out. Perhaps if we'd maintained that knowledge that the early settlers had down through the years, we might have now had a greater appreciation of the need to involve traditional land owners in land management. That would possibly be one. Absolute eye-opener, Bill. Do we know anything about whether or not the Indigenous people produced anything resembling wine?
Yes, they could ferment honey.
Didn't see that coming.
And also they had various plants for tobacco, which I suppose is a narcotic like wine. Pitchery the most obvious, but there are many others.
Well, Collins and Margaret River have nailed the caper these days, and we'd love to present you with this bottle because being in Canberra as you do, you are starved of really good stuff. We control the supply of good stuff from this part of the country. Bill, thank you so much. Lunch is next. It's going to be really quick because we want to get back on track.